the question for today is, why can't we get absolute proof that acetaminophen causes autism in susceptible babies and children? So before addressing this question, first let me say that all the available evidence is very conclusive, beyond any reasonable doubt, that acetaminophen does cause autism in susceptible babies and children. We know what creates susceptibility, we know how it creates susceptibility, we know how the drug works to become toxic, and all kinds of evidence are telling us what's going on. So we know what's going on, but we don't have this thing called absolute proof. Now, absolute proof in science, in this particular case, for this question, would mean that I would need to take a bunch of children that we know are susceptible, and we would need to give them, they're susceptible to acetaminophen toxicity. We would need to give them acetaminophen, and then we'd take a bunch of other children that are the same, they're also susceptible to acetaminophen toxicity, and we would need to give them what we call a placebo. So even the doctors giving the drug wouldn't know what they were giving. Then, if the people who got the children and babies who got the acetaminophen had much more autism, that would be what we call absolute proof. Now, that I hope that experiment is never done. That's a horrifically unethical experiment to do, because we already know that the drug is very toxic and we know what makes it toxic. So there's no point in getting that quote unquote absolute proof when we know what's going on. So getting the absolute proof would require hurting people, and in a very profound way. So the parachute, I call it the parachute paradigm, is another great example of something where we don't want to get absolute proof. So nobody's ever taken, say, 100 people, given them all a backpack and thrown them out of an airplane, and only half of the backpacks contain a parachute. Now, if you did that experiment, you would end up with 50 people who were tragically deceased if the airplane was high enough up in the air, because they wouldn't have a parachute. It would be a placebo in their backpack, and then you would have 50 people that survived the fall because they had a parachute, and that would be absolute proof that a parachute works. But look, we understand the physics of parachutes just like we understand the biochemistry and the toxicology and the pharmacology of acetaminophen, and we know what's going on. So there's no reason to do that experiment, and it would be very hard to get volunteers to do that experiment anyway. So that's the big picture on why we can't get absolute proof, and we don't even want to try to get absolute proof on our conclusion that Tylenol is causing autism in susceptible babies and children.